Lucas Reynolds, at 42, had built an empire out of nothing. As the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the world, he was used to having control over every aspect of his life. His wealth and influence had earned him the kind of power that few could imagine, but it came at a price. Trust was something he could rarely afford. So when irregularities started showing up in the company's financial reports, he knew he had to take action. And that's when his mind turned to Sarah Mitchell. Sarah had been his personal assistant for 3 years. Sharp, efficient, and always 2 steps ahead, she had become an indispensable part of his daily life. But lately, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The financial discrepancies didn't make sense, and worse, they pointed to someone with access to sensitive information. Someone close to him. His gut twisted with suspicion. Late one night, long after most of the office had cleared out, Lucas sat alone in his office, illuminated only by the dim glow of his computer screen. He stared at the numbers again, double-checking, triple-checking, but the outcome was the same. There were funds missing, a lot of them, and all the evidence pointed back to Sarah. It didn't make sense. Why would she risk everything for money? She was well paid and trusted. Driven by a need to know the truth, Lucas made a decision. He would confront Sarah in the morning, but first, he needed more than just a hunch. He needed proof. The next day, Lucas waited for the perfect moment. Sarah's desk was next to his office, neat and organized as always. When she stepped out for a meeting, Lucas saw his chance. His heart pounded as he walked over, his mind racing through every worst-case scenario. He knew it was wrong to invade her privacy, but he had no choice. He quickly opened the top drawer of her desk and rummaged through files. Nothing suspicious there. Moving on to her bag, he hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the zipper. What if I'm wrong? He thought, but the doubt vanished as soon as he opened it. Among her personal items, a small, worn photograph fell out. Lucas froze. He bent down to pick it up, and his world spun. The face in the picture was unmistakable. It was Amelia. Amelia Hastings, his college sweetheart. The woman who had vanished from his life 20 years ago without a trace. Her face, the same one that had haunted his dreams, stared back at him, as youthful and vibrant as ever. His mind raced, flooded with questions. Why did Sarah have this? What did this mean? Before he could even process the shock, the office door opened. Sarah stood in the doorway, her eyes widening as she saw what Lucas held in his hand. What are you doing? Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. Lucas stood up slowly, his grip tightening around the photograph. His usually calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, controlled fury. Why do you have a picture of her? He demanded, holding the photo up for her to see. Sarah's face turned pale as she took a step back, clearly startled by the intensity in his voice. Lucas, I can explain. I'm listening, he said, his voice low but sharp. Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes darting from the photo to Lucas, trying to find the right words. That's my mother. The world seemed to stop for Lucas. Her mother? The words echoed in his mind, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. How could this be possible? Amelia, his Amelia, had a daughter? His gaze flickered between the photograph and Sarah, struggling to connect the pieces. Amelia Hastings is your mother? He asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. Where is she? What happened to her? Why didn't she? Stop, Sarah interrupted, her voice suddenly filled with emotion. I've been searching for answers my whole life. I didn't know who you were until recently. My mother disappeared when I was a child, and I've spent years trying to find out why. I never meant for you to find out like this. Lucas staggered back, his mind spinning with the revelation. He sat down heavily in his chair, his head in his hands. Amelia had a daughter. For all these years, he had believed she'd simply vanished, leaving him in the dark without a word. He had searched for her, but the trail always went cold. And now, the missing piece of the puzzle was standing right in front of him. He looked up at Sarah, his voice calmer but still filled with urgency. Why now? Why are you here? Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she took a deep breath. Because I think something happened to her. Something more than just running away. I've found things, letters, documents, that suggest she didn't disappear willingly. She was hiding from someone. or something. And I believe you're the only one who can help me figure out what happened." The room fell into a heavy silence. Lucas stared at the woman in front of him, realizing that everything he thought he knew was about to change. Amelia wasn't just a memory anymore. She had a daughter who had been living in the shadows of a mystery for 2 decades. "We need to find her," Lucas whispered, almost to himself. Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. "We will, but we have to be careful. If what I found is true, there are people who don't want us to uncover the truth." Lucas stood up, his resolve hardening. For the first time in years, he felt the old fire reigniting within him. He wasn't just a billionaire running a company. He was a man with unfinished business, a past to confront, and now, a mystery to solve. "Then let's find out what really happened," he said, his voice filled with new purpose. And with that, Lucas and Sarah embarked on a journey neither of them could have predicted. A journey into a past full of secrets, lies, and a love that refused to die. The air in Lucas's office felt heavy, almost suffocating, as Sarah stood there, her emotions barely contained. Lucas couldn't shake the shock of the last few minutes. His mind was spinning with the revelation. Amelia had a daughter, and that daughter had been working by his side for the last 3 years, unknowingly dragging him closer to a mystery he thought he had buried long ago. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Lucas stood up, pacing back and forth, trying to gather his thoughts. The photo of Amelia, now resting on his desk, was a haunting reminder of the life he'd once imagined with her. His heart ached with questions that had no answers. "Sarah," Lucas began, his voice steady but laced with tension. "You need to tell me everything. Every single detail you know about your mother's disappearance." Sarah, visibly struggling to maintain her composure, nodded and sank into the chair across from him. She took a deep breath, the weight of her secret finally coming to the surface. "I don't remember much about her," Sarah said softly, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I was 5 when she disappeared. For most of my life, I was told she left because she couldn't handle the pressure. Being a single mom, financial stress. But as I grew older, things didn't add up. My grandmother would slip things sometimes, hints that my mother hadn't left by choice." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. The idea that Amelia had been struggling, that she might have been in danger all those years, gnawed at him. He hadn't been there for her. Sarah's voice brought him back to the present. "I started looking into her past. That's how I found out about you. I pieced together some old letters she had hidden. She wrote about you, Lucas, about how much she loved you and how you had big dreams together. She was planning a future with you." Lucas's heart clenched. He had loved Amelia more than he had ever loved anyone. They had been inseparable in college, talking about traveling the world, starting a life together. Then, suddenly, she vanished. No goodbyes, no explanations, just gone. "I looked for her," Lucas admitted quietly, his voice filled with the pain of 2 decades. "I searched everywhere, but it was like she disappeared into thin air. I didn't know she had you, Sarah. If I had known—" Sarah interrupted him, her voice suddenly sharp. "That's what I don't understand. Why didn't you try harder? How could you just move on without finding out what happened to her?" Lucas froze, the weight of her accusation settling like a stone in his chest. He had asked himself that same question over and over again. How had he not done more? He had thrown himself into his work, trying to numb the pain of losing her, building an empire while burying the memories of the woman he had once planned to marry. But the guilt never left him. "I thought she left me," Lucas confessed, his voice raw. "I thought she didn't want me anymore. I had no idea. I had no idea you existed. I didn't know she was in trouble." Sarah's face softened slightly, though the tension between them still crackled. "I don't know what happened to her, Lucas, but I think someone made her disappear. I've found documents, things she was hiding before she left. She wasn't just a single mom struggling to get by. She was involved in something dangerous." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous how?" "There were letters," Sarah explained, leaning forward. "Letters she never sent to you, warning you to stay away. She mentioned someone named Richard Grayson. Do you know who that is?" Lucas's breath caught in his throat. Richard Grayson. He hadn't heard that name in years. Grayson had been a powerful figure in the tech industry, a man with far-reaching influence who wasn't afraid to bend the rules to get what he wanted. In college, he had been Lucas's mentor, a visionary who had helped him get his first company off the ground. But Grayson had a dark side, one that Lucas had only started to glimpse before they parted ways. "Grayson was my mentor," Lucas said slowly, as if the words themselves felt poisonous. "He helped me when I was just starting out. But we had a falling out, and I cut ties with him years ago. I had no idea Amelia was connected to him." "She was," Sarah said firmly, "and I think that's why she disappeared. She was trying to protect us from him." The realization hit Lucas like a tidal wave. Amelia hadn't left because she didn't love him. She had left to protect him and their daughter. The thought made his chest tighten with regret and rage. He had spent years believing he had been abandoned, when all along, Amelia had been running from something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "What did you find in the letters?" Lucas asked, his voice now steady, the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together in his mind. "There were warnings," Sarah continued. "She told you to stay away from Grayson, that he wasn't who you thought he was. She knew something, Lucas, something he didn't want getting out. And when she found out, I think he made her disappear." Lucas clenched his fists, fury bubbling under the surface. "And you've been working for me all this time, trying to figure this out?" Sarah nodded, her expression conflicted. "I didn't know what else to do. You were the only link I had to her past, to what really happened. I needed to get close to you, to figure out what you knew. I never meant to deceive you, but I had to know the truth." Lucas stared at her, the betrayal and hurt swirling inside him. But at the same time, he understood. Sarah had been searching for answers her whole life, just like him. And now, after all these years, they were on the verge of uncovering a secret that had been buried for 2 decades. "Then we'll find out the truth together," Lucas said, his voice resolute. "Whatever happened to Amelia, I'm not letting Grayson or anyone else get away with it." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "Then let's start digging." Without another word, they gathered the few clues Sarah had managed to piece together. The letters, the documents, the small bits of information that pointed them back to the man who had once controlled everything. Lucas's world had just been turned upside down, but for the first time in years, he had a purpose beyond business and wealth. He was going to find out what happened to Amelia, no matter the cost. And this time, he wasn't letting go. As Lucas and Sarah prepared to dig into the dark underworld of Grayson's empire, they both knew one thing for certain. The truth wasn't going to be easy to uncover. And the closer they got, the more dangerous it would become. But Lucas wasn't the same man he had been 20 years ago. Now, he had the power, the resources, and the drive to fight back. And with Sarah by his side, they would stop at nothing to uncover the truth about Amelia's disappearance. The past was about to collide with the present in ways they could never have predicted. The silence between Lucas and Sarah was thick as they sat in his office, poring over the scattered documents. Sarah's letters, Amelia's warnings, and vague references to Richard Grayson were the only clues they had. But Lucas knew they weren't enough. If Grayson had been involved in Amelia's disappearance, he would have covered his tracks meticulously. This wouldn't be easy. Lucas leaned back in his chair, the weight of years pressing down on him. He had built empires, crushed rivals, and outsmarted some of the brightest minds in the world. But none of that mattered now. This was personal. Sarah flipped through the worn pages of her mother's letters, her fingers trembling slightly. "There's something here," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something we're missing." Lucas rubbed his temples, his mind racing. Grayson wouldn't leave loose ends. If your mother knew something, she didn't just vanish. He made sure of it. We need to find out what she knew that scared him so much. He stood up abruptly, moving toward the large windows that overlooked the city below. The skyline was illuminated, a testament to his success, but right now, it felt hollow. He had spent 20 years chasing wealth, thinking it would fill the void that Amelia left behind. Now, he realized how wrong he had been. "We need to start with the people closest to her," Lucas said, turning back to Sarah. "Someone has to know more. Friends, colleagues, anyone who might have been with her in the months before she disappeared." Sarah nodded. "There was someone a friend of hers from college. She mentioned him a few times in her letters, someone named Mark. I think they stayed in touch after you and after she left. Lucas felt a pang in his chest. After she left. Those words cut deeper than he expected. He pushed the emotion aside and focused on the task at hand. Do you know where we can find him? I have an old address, Sarah said, pulling out a yellowed envelope from her bag. It's a long shot, but it's all we have. Lucas wasted no time. We'll go now. Get your things. The drive to the outskirts of the city was tense, the air between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Lucas gripped the steering wheel, his mind flashing back to those years with Amelia. He had loved her fiercely, and when she disappeared, it broke something inside him. The idea that she had been running from danger rather than abandoning him filled him with guilt. He should have known. He should have fought harder to find her. Do you think this Mark guy knows what happened to her? Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Lucas shook his head. I don't know, but he's the only lead we have right now. If he was close to her, he might have noticed something. They pulled up to a modest suburban house. The lights were on inside, and Lucas could see a figure moving around through the curtains. He exchanged a glance with Sarah before stepping out of the car. As they approached the door, Lucas felt a knot of tension tightening in his chest. He knocked, his heart pounding in his ears. Moments later, the door creaked open, and a man in his mid-40s appeared, his face lined with years of worry and fatigue. Mark? Lucas asked, his voice calm but firm. The man's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Who's asking? I'm Lucas Reynolds. This is Sarah Mitchell. We're here about Amelia Hastings. The mention of Amelia's name caused Mark's face to pale. He opened the door wider, glancing nervously down the street before gesturing for them to come inside. Once inside, the air felt even heavier. Mark motioned toward a worn-out sofa. I haven't heard that name in years, he said, sinking into a chair across from them. What do you want with Amelia? Lucas leaned forward, his voice serious. We need to know what happened to her. You were close to her, right? She wrote about you. Mark's eyes flickered with recognition, but also with something darker, fear. Yeah, we stayed in touch. But Amelia, she was mixed up in something dangerous. I tried to help her, but she wouldn't listen. She said she had to protect Sarah. And you? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean, protect us? Mark ran a hand through his graying hair, his expression grim. She found out something she wasn't supposed to. Grayson, he was involved in some shady deals, stuff that would have destroyed him if it got out. Amelia had proof, but she knew it wasn't safe to keep it. She was terrified that if Grayson found out she had it, he'd come after her. That's why she ran. Lucas felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just about a love lost. This was a cover-up. Did she ever tell you what the proof was? Mark shook his head. She was too scared. She said the less I knew, the better. But I think she hid it. Somewhere Grayson couldn't find it. Sarah, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, her voice shaky. Do you know where? Anything she might have said about where she would go if things got bad? Mark hesitated, clearly torn. Finally, he nodded. She had a safe house. A place she said she'd go if she ever needed to disappear for good. I don't know if she went there, but it's the only place I can think of. Lucas's pulse quickened. This was the first real lead they had. Where is it? Mark scribbled an address on a scrap of paper and handed it to Lucas. It's a cabin, upstate. I haven't been there in years, but if she's still out there, that's where she'd be. Lucas took the paper, his fingers tightening around it. Thank you, he said, standing. We'll find her. As they left Mark's house, the weight of their mission pressed heavily on both of them. They had a location now, a place where Amelia might have gone when the danger became too great. But with every step closer to the truth, the risks grew. As Lucas and Sarah drove into the night, neither of them spoke, but they both knew the next phase of their journey was about to begin. They were on the verge of uncovering something bigger than either of them had imagined. And whatever they found at that cabin would either give them answers or bury them deeper in the mystery. The past was no longer just a memory. It was alive, and it was pulling them in. The drive to the cabin was long and tense. The further Lucas and Sarah got from the city, the quieter the world became, as if the past was pulling them into a place forgotten by time. The winding road stretched before them, flanked by towering trees that cast shadows over their path. The silence in the car was palpable, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional sound of Sarah shifting nervously in her seat. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing. The cabin was their last hope of finding answers. Every mile brought them closer to Amelia, or at least to the truth about what had happened to her. But with that hope came fear of what they might find and whether they were too late. Sarah stared out the window, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her jacket. She had been quiet for most of the drive, lost in thought. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you think she's still there?" Her voice was soft, almost as if she didn't want to hear the answer. Lucas glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever we find, it'll be the closest we've come to understanding what happened." The thought of finally confronting the past, of maybe seeing Amelia again, sent a mixture of emotions swirling through him. He had spent 2 decades burying his feelings for her, trying to move on with his life. But now, everything was surfacing again, and with Sarah by his side, the weight of the past felt even heavier. The sun was beginning to set by the time they reached the remote area where the cabin was supposed to be. The sky turned a dark shade of orange, casting eerie shadows over the forest that surrounded them. Lucas parked the car at the end of a dirt road, the path ahead too overgrown to drive any further. "This is it," he said quietly, more to himself than to Sarah. The air was cold, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones. They got out of the car, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound as they made their way through the woods, guided by the dimming light. As they walked, Sarah's nerves began to fray. She could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. What if she's not here? What if we don't find anything?" she asked, her voice filled with doubt. Lucas stopped and turned to face her, his eyes steady. "We'll find something, Sarah, even if it's just more pieces of the puzzle. We're not leaving here without answers." His determination was the only thing keeping her grounded. She nodded, swallowing her fear as they continued toward the cabin. When they reached the clearing, the sight of the cabin hit them both like a punch to the gut. It was small, worn down by years of neglect, yet there was something undeniably eerie about it. The windows were dark, the wood creaking in the wind as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for them. Lucas hesitated at the door, his hand hovering over the weathered handle. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he wanted to open it, if he was ready to face whatever was inside. But there was no turning back now. He pushed the door open with a groan, the sound echoing in the stillness. The interior of the cabin was sparse. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by their entrance. Old furniture, faded with time, lined the room. It was clear no one had been here in years, but there were small signs of life. A blanket thrown over the back of a chair, a stack of yellowed papers on the table, as if someone had left in a hurry but planned to return. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "She was here," she whispered, her fingers brushing the blanket. She really was here. Lucas moved through the room with purpose, his eyes scanning every detail. His heart was pounding, each beat louder in the quiet cabin. Something about this place felt too real. Amelia's presence lingered in every corner. As they moved deeper into the cabin, Lucas noticed a small door in the back, slightly ajar. His instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he pushed it open. Behind the door was a small, hidden room, barely big enough to stand in, but it wasn't the size of the room that caught his attention. It was what was inside. Tacked to the walls were dozens of photographs. Old, grainy pictures of Lucas, Amelia, and even Sarah. Letters, some of them unfinished, scattered across a small desk. There was a map with locations circled in red ink, cryptic notes written in the margins. It was like stepping into Amelia's mind. Everything she had been running from, everything she had been trying to figure out, was laid out before them. Sarah stepped into the room, her eyes wide with disbelief. She was tracking him, she said, pointing to a picture of Richard Grayson pinned to the wall. She was trying to expose him. Lucas's stomach twisted. She knew more than I thought. More than anyone thought. They began to sift through the papers, piecing together Amelia's last movements. It was clear she had been in hiding, gathering evidence against Grayson. But the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that something had gone terribly wrong. One letter, in particular, caught Sarah's attention. It was addressed to Lucas, but never sent. "Lucas, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started." The letter detailed Amelia's fears, her desperation to keep Sarah safe, and her regret for leaving Lucas behind. But what shook him most was the final line. "Grayson is closer than you think." Lucas's blood ran cold. If Grayson had been hunting Amelia, then that meant they were in danger now. They had to move quickly. "We need to leave," Lucas said, urgency creeping into his voice. "Grayson might know we're here. He'll come for us next." Before Sarah could respond, there was a noise outside, a rustling in the bushes. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He motioned for Sarah to stay quiet as he crept toward the window, peering out into the darkness. The shadows outside shifted unnervingly. Someone was out there. "Get down," Lucas whispered, pulling Sarah behind a heavy piece of furniture as the front door creaked open. Footsteps echoed through the cabin, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. Lucas's mind raced. Was it Grayson? Or someone sent to silence them? The cabin, which had moments ago felt like a place of answers, now felt like a trap. Lucas held his breath, his muscles tensing as the slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the cabin. The dim light filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls barely illuminated the small space, but it was enough to cast long shadows, shadows that now moved as someone entered the room. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the unknown bearing down on both Lucas and Sarah as they huddled behind the old furniture, trying to stay silent. Sarah's hand trembled in Lucas's grasp, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze, though his own pulse was racing. His mind was spinning, calculating the odds. Whoever had followed them here wasn't a friend. That much was certain, and judging by the methodical way they moved, this wasn't some random intruder. They had been found. A creak from the floorboards nearby made Lucas flinch. He peered through a gap in the furniture, catching a glimpse of a shadowy figure scanning the room. The person was tall, dressed in dark clothes, their face obscured by the shadows. They moved with purpose, like they were searching for something, or someone. Lucas's mind raced. How did they find us so fast? Grayson must have had them followed. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They weren't just running out of time. They were out of it. He motioned to Sarah to stay quiet, his eyes locking with hers for a brief moment, conveying a silent promise that he would get them out of this. Slowly, carefully, Lucas shifted his weight, scanning the room for an exit. But the only way out was the front door, where their uninvited guest was now standing, blocking their escape. The figure moved closer to the desk, their gloved hand picking up one of the letters Amelia had written. Lucas watched as they scanned the page, and for a second, he felt a surge of anger. Amelia had been running, hiding, for years. She had sacrificed everything to protect him, to protect Sarah. And now, whoever this was, they were trying to destroy whatever was left of her legacy. The figure crumpled the letter and tossed it aside, turning toward the small room where Lucas and Sarah hid. Panic flared in Lucas's chest. They had moments, maybe seconds, before they were found. He tightened his grip on Sarah's hand, whispering so softly she almost didn't hear him. "When I tell you, run." Sarah's eyes widened, fear evident, but she nodded, trusting Lucas without question. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts as they waited for the inevitable. The figure's footsteps grew louder as they approached, the floor creaking under their weight. Lucas braced himself, calculating the moment. Just as the shadow reached the door of the small room, Lucas surged forward, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy chair, and hurled it with all his strength. The chair smashed into the figure, sending them stumbling backward with a grunt of surprise. "Run!" Lucas shouted, pulling Sarah to her feet. They bolted out of the room, racing for the front door. But the figure recovered quickly, and within seconds, they were after them. Lucas and Sarah burst into the cold night air, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they sprinted toward the tree line. The forest loomed ahead, dark and menacing, but it was their only hope. Behind them, the sound of pursuit was unmistakable. The figure was fast, Too fast. Lucas's mind raced. They couldn't outrun this person. Not in the dark, unfamiliar woods. But they couldn't stop either. This way, he hissed, grabbing Sarah's hand and veering left toward a denser section of the forest. Branches whipped at their faces, the undergrowth thick and unforgiving. But Lucas knew their only chance was to lose their pursuer in the trees. They ran for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was only minutes. The adrenaline coursing through Lucas's veins was the only thing keeping him going. Finally, when they were deep enough into the woods that the sounds of their pursuer had faded, Lucas slowed, pulling Sarah behind a large tree. Both of them collapsed against the trunk, gasping for air, their hearts pounding in their chests. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of their heavy breathing and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Lucas strained his ears, listening for any sign of their pursuer. Silence. Had they lost them? Sarah, her face pale and streaked with dirt, turned to Lucas. Who was that? Do you think Grayson sent them? Lucas shook his head, still catching his breath. It has to be. He knows we're getting close to the truth, and he'll do whatever it takes to stop us. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. We're running out of time, Sarah. We need to figure this out before they find us again. Sarah looked down, her brow furrowed in thought. There has to be something we missed in the cabin. Something important. Why else would they come after us like that? Lucas nodded. She was right. Whatever Amelia had been working on, whatever evidence she had gathered, it was enough to make Grayson desperate. But if they went back to the cabin now, it would be suicide. Whoever was after them would be waiting. We need help, Lucas said after a moment. Someone we can trust. Sarah looked at him, her expression uncertain. Who? Who can we trust with this? Lucas thought for a second, running through a mental list of his contacts. There was one person, an old friend from his early tech days, someone who had worked with him before Grayson's influence took hold. Someone who knew how dangerous Grayson could be. I know a guy, Lucas said, determination hardening his voice. His name is Ethan. He helped me get my first company off the ground. If anyone can help us take Grayson down, it's him. Sarah looked hesitant but nodded. Okay, but we need to be careful. If Grayson's watching us, he might be watching your friends too. Lucas knew she was right, but at this point, they had no other options. They couldn't fight this battle alone. Not with Grayson's reach extending further than they could imagine. But as he looked into the dark forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was far from over. Whoever had found them tonight wouldn't stop. And Lucas had a sinking feeling that they were just getting started. The night air was still as Lucas and Sarah crouched behind the thick trunk of an oak tree, their breathing slowly steadying. Every inch of Lucas's body ached from the adrenaline rush, the flight through the woods, and the uncertainty that still hung over them like a storm cloud. Whoever had tracked them to the cabin wasn't done, and now every second felt borrowed. Lucas knew they couldn't stay hidden in the forest for long. The shadowy figure could return with backup, and there were only so many places to run. His mind was racing, calculating the next move, piecing together fragments of his old life, before Grayson, before the lies. We have to contact Ethan, Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's the only one who can help us now. Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and determination. You trust him? After everything? Lucas met her gaze, his jaw tight. I don't have a choice. Ethan's the only person I know who can operate under the radar, and he hates Grayson as much as I do. If anyone can help us expose him, it's Ethan. They moved cautiously back to the car, still hidden in the darkness at the edge of the forest. Lucas could feel Sarah's tension rising as they slipped into the vehicle, the doors clicking shut in the silence. He started the engine, the soft hum breaking the quiet, and they drove away, leaving the cabin and the danger behind. But the weight of their discovery stayed with them, heavy and oppressive. Ethan lived in a small, secluded home tucked away in the hills, far from the reach of the city and its corporate chaos. Lucas had met him years ago, back when they were both young, ambitious, and willing to take risks. Ethan had been brilliant, a tech genius with a knack for dismantling systems and finding vulnerabilities. He had built his own empire, but unlike Lucas, he had chosen a quieter path, working in the shadows, far from the limelight. It was well after midnight when they arrived. The house was dark, but Lucas knew Ethan was there. The man rarely slept, always working on something, always one step ahead. As they approached the front door, Lucas hesitated for a moment. He hadn't spoken to Ethan in years, not since their falling out over Grayson. But now, with Sarah by his side and the shadow of danger looming over them, he had no other choice. He knocked. The sound echoed in the quiet night, and for a few tense moments, there was no response. Then, the door creaked open, revealing a tall figure, backlit by the faint glow of computer screens inside. Ethan stood there, his eyes sharp and calculating, as if he had already pieced together why Lucas was here. "Lucas," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "It's been a long time." Lucas nodded, his expression serious. "We need your help." Ethan's gaze shifted to Sarah, then back to Lucas. He stepped aside, motioning for them to enter without a word. Inside, the house was cluttered with tech, wires, monitors, and servers buzzing with quiet energy. It felt like stepping into a nerve center of some underground operation, and in a way, it was. Ethan had always preferred the chaos of technology to the order of the outside world. Once they were seated in a small, cluttered room, Ethan leaned against a desk, arms crossed. "What's going on? You wouldn't be here unless it was serious." Lucas took a deep breath, his mind racing through everything that had led them here. "It's about Amelia." The mention of her name made Ethan's eyes flicker with recognition. He nodded slowly, as if connecting pieces of a puzzle in his mind. "I always wondered what happened to her." "She's alive, or she was," Sarah interjected, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We found a cabin where she was hiding. She was gathering evidence against Grayson. She knew something that made her disappear." Ethan's brow furrowed, the intensity in his gaze deepening. "Grayson, of course." He pushed off the desk, pacing as he processed the information. If Amelia was involved with Grayson's dirty dealings, it makes sense. He's been cleaning up his messes for years, silencing anyone who gets too close. Lucas's fists clenched. "We think she had proof, something that could take him down. But someone's after us now. They tracked us to the cabin." Ethan stopped pacing, his expression hardening. "Grayson's not going to stop until he's sure you're both out of the way. If you have anything on him, he'll send everything he's got to eliminate the threat." Sarah leaned forward, her voice urgent. "We need to know how to stop him, how to expose what he's done." Ethan paused, then nodded slowly. "There's only one way. We need to dig into Grayson's operations. Find the evidence Amelia was gathering, but we'll need to do it quietly. Grayson has eyes everywhere, and if he catches wind that we're coming for him, he'll shut us down before we even start." Lucas knew Ethan was right. Grayson's reach was vast, and they were running out of time. But if there was anyone who could outsmart the tech mogul, it was Ethan. "What do we do first?" Lucas asked, his voice steady, though the weight of their task pressed heavily on him. Ethan moved to one of his computers, fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm going to set up a secure connection. If Amelia left a digital trail, we'll find it. But it'll take time. Grayson's systems are locked down tight. We can't just waltz in and take what we need." Lucas glanced at Sarah. He could see the tension in her eyes, the fear of what they were up against. But she had come this far, and he wasn't going to let her face this alone. Minutes passed in silence as Ethan worked, hacking into systems with a precision that made it clear he hadn't lost his touch. Lucas watched the screens flash with lines of code, the information flowing faster than he could follow. And then, finally, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as something came into focus. "Got it," he said, his voice tense. "There's a file, heavily encrypted, buried deep in Grayson's network. I can't access it from here, but it's something Amelia tried to upload years ago. It might be what we're looking for." Sarah leaned closer, her heart pounding. "How do we get it?" Ethan's expression darkened. "It's not going to be easy. The file is stored on an isolated server, only accessible from inside Grayson's headquarters. We'd have to break in, physically retrieve it." Lucas's stomach dropped. A direct confrontation with Grayson on his home turf was a suicide mission. But if that file held the key to taking him down, they had no choice. "We'll do it," Lucas said, his voice firm, despite the danger. "We'll get the file." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You realize what you're up against, right? Grayson doesn't play by the rules. If he catches you, you're not getting out." Lucas met his gaze, unflinching. "If we don't stop him, he'll come for us. And we're not going to let that happen." Sarah nodded beside him, her face set with determination. "We've come this far. We can't back down now." Ethan sighed, pushing away from the desk. "All right, I'll help you. But if we're going to do this, we need a plan. A good one." Lucas's heart raced. They were stepping into the lion's den, and there was no turning back. Grayson had taken Amelia, shattered their lives, and now, after all these years, they were finally on the verge of bringing him down. The past was catching up to them, and it was about to explode. The weight of the mission settled heavily on Lucas's shoulders as Ethan finished outlining their plan. They were walking into one of the most secure buildings in the city, Grayson's headquarters. Every inch of the place was designed to keep intruders out, and once they were inside, there would be no margin for error. One wrong move, and it wouldn't just be the file they'd lose. It would be their lives. Ethan's voice broke through Lucas's thoughts. "I'll need at least 48 hours to create a window for you to get inside. It's not just about avoiding the security guards. Grayson's systems are advanced. He'll know the moment someone touches that server unless we can bypass the alarms." Lucas nodded, though the knot in his stomach tightened. He had faced impossible odds before in business, but this was different. This was life and death, and it wasn't just his life on the line anymore. Sarah sat next to him, tense but composed, her mind already racing ahead, thinking through every possible outcome. "Do we have a way in?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear she had to be feeling. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "There's a service entrance that's used for deliveries, but it's monitored by facial recognition. We'll need to override the system and trick it into letting you through. Once you're inside, I can guide you remotely, but you'll need to move fast. The window won't stay open for long." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, his mind working through the logistics. "And once we reach the server room?" "That's the tricky part," Ethan said, typing rapidly on one of his mini keyboards. "The server is in a restricted section of the building, and the access requires biometric scans. But I've managed to get my hands on some old credentials from a former employee, someone high up in the company. With a little luck, we can clone the data and use it to get past the locks." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "You're sure this will work?" Ethan met his gaze, his expression serious. "No, but it's the best shot we've got." The room fell silent as the gravity of what they were about to do sank in. There was no turning back now. Lucas glanced at Sarah, who had been unusually quiet. She was staring at the floor, lost in thought. "You okay?" Lucas asked, his voice low and gentle. Sarah blinked, looking up at him. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of determination and fear. I keep thinking about her. My mom. What she went through, all the sacrifices she made. And now, we're walking right into the same danger she faced." Lucas placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "We'll find out the truth. We'll finish what she started." She nodded, though her face was pale. "I'm ready." 2 days later, they stood outside the imposing building of Grayson Technologies, the sleek glass tower rising into the night sky like a fortress. The streets were quiet, the usual bustling energy of the city reduced to a distant hum. Lucas adjusted the small earpiece that Ethan had given him, listening as Ethan's voice crackled through the line. "All right, you're clear to approach," Ethan said. "The cameras are looping, and I've bypassed the facial recognition software. You've got a 5-minute window before the system resets. Go." Lucas glanced at Sarah, giving her a curt nod, and they moved forward, slipping into the alleyway beside the building. The service entrance was ahead, a plain metal door with a keypad on the side. Lucas punched in the code Ethan had provided, and with a soft click, the door swung open. They entered quickly, the air inside cool and sterile. The corridor was narrow, lined with pipes and electrical panels, clearly designed for maintenance staff rather than executives. Lucas kept his pace steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. Every step felt heavier than the last, the enormity of what they were doing pressing down on him. "Keep going straight," Ethan's voice guided them through the earpiece. At the end of the hall, take a right. There's a stairwell that leads up to the restricted floors. Sarah moved beside Lucas, her face tense but focused. They turned the corner, finding the stairwell just as Ethan had said. The narrow concrete steps spiraled upward, and Lucas led the way, his footsteps echoing faintly in the confined space. Halfway up the stairs, Ethan's voice came through again. You're heading toward the checkpoint. This is where you'll need the credentials I cloned. Just hold the card up to the scanner, and it should give you access. Lucas reached into his pocket, pulling out the forged access card. He glanced at Sarah, who gave him a small nod. They reached the landing, where a sleek scanner was embedded into the wall. Lucas held the card up to it, his heart skipping a beat as the machine processed the data. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft beep, the light turned green, and the door unlocked. You're in, Ethan confirmed. Now move fast. You don't have much time before the security systems catch on. They entered the restricted area, the sterile, high-tech environment, a stark contrast to the industrial corridors they had passed through. The server room was ahead, its entrance marked with a keypad and another biometric scanner. Lucas's hand tightened around the card as they approached. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway flickered. Lucas froze, his instincts kicking in. Something was wrong. Ethan, Lucas hissed into the earpiece. What's happening? There was a brief pause, and then Ethan's voice came through, tense. I'm not sure. The system's glitching. You might have triggered something when you used the cloned card. I'm trying to shut it down, but you need to move. Now. Lucas swiped the card again, this time faster, and the door to the server room clicked open. They slipped inside, the cold air from the servers hitting them immediately. Towering racks of computer hardware lined the room, the hum of machinery filling the air. Okay, Ethan said, his voice steadying. The file you need is stored in the central terminal, 3 rows down. You'll need to insert the drive I gave you to download it. But be quick. I don't know how much longer I can keep the alarms from going off. Lucas and Sarah moved quickly, weaving between the racks until they reached the terminal. Lucas plugged in the drive, his eyes scanning the screen as the data began to transfer. Every second felt like an eternity. Come on, come on, Lucas muttered under his breath, willing the download to move faster. Just as the progress bar reached 100%, the lights in the server room flickered again, this time followed by a loud, blaring alarm. Damn it! Ethan's voice came through, panicked. They've triggered the lockdown. You need to get out of there now. Lucas yanked the drive from the terminal, grabbing Sarah's hand. Run! They bolted for the exit, but as they reached the door, a group of security guards stormed into the hallway, guns raised. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, the reality of their situation crashing down on him. There was no escape now. Grayson had caught them. The deafening sound of the alarm echoed through the sterile corridors of Grayson Technologies. The flashing red lights bathed everything in an eerie glow, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Lucas's heart was racing, the adrenaline surging through his veins as the group of security guards blocked their exit. They stood there, guns raised, the tension thick in the air. Lucas's grip tightened around the small drive in his pocket, the only thing that mattered right now. It held the key to everything, the truth about Grayson's crimes, and possibly the answers to Amelia's disappearance. He couldn't let them lose it now, not after everything. One of the guards, a burly man with a stone-cold expression, took a step forward. Drop whatever you're holding and put your hands up. Now. Lucas exchanged a quick glance with Sarah. Her face was pale, her breath quick and shallow, but there was fire in her eyes. She wasn't giving up, and neither was he. I said. Before the guard could finish, the lights flickered again, and then, as if by some miracle, the hallway plunged into darkness. The sudden blackout sent the guards into confusion, and in the split second of chaos, Lucas knew this was their chance. Run! He hissed to Sarah, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the opposite end of the hallway. They sprinted into the darkness, the sound of shouts and boots pounding against the floor behind them. The emergency lights flickered back on just as they rounded a corner, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Ethan, Lucas gasped into his earpiece. What the hell just happened? Ethan's voice crackled through, tense but controlled. I managed to trigger a localized blackout, but it won't last. They're already trying to bring the system back online. You need to get out now. There's a service elevator 2 floors down. I'm disabling the locks on it now. Where do we go? Sarah asked, her voice strained but steady. Take the stairs on your left, down to the maintenance level, Ethan instructed. I'll guide you from there. Lucas nodded, his mind racing as they made their way to the stairwell, throwing open the door and descending the steps 2 at a time. The guards were close behind, their shouts growing louder as they gave chase. The air was thick with tension, the narrow staircase amplifying every sound. As they reached the maintenance level, the cold, metallic smell of the basement hit them. It was darker down here, the shadows stretching longer, the hum of machinery filling the silence. Lucas looked around, trying to orient himself. Straight ahead, Ethan's voice cut through. The elevator should be at the end of the hall. They moved quickly, dodging past pipes and large electrical panels. The elevator doors came into view, their polished surface a stark contrast to the gritty surroundings. Lucas punched the button, his breath catching as they waited for the doors to open. Come on, Sarah whispered, glancing over her shoulder. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, drawing closer. The doors slid open just in time. Lucas and Sarah rushed inside, hitting the button for the parking garage below. As the elevator descended, Lucas leaned heavily against the wall, his heart still pounding from the close call. Sarah stood next to him, her hand on her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Are you okay? Lucas asked, his voice soft, but filled with concern. Sarah nodded, her eyes still wide with adrenaline. We can't stop now. We have to get out of here. The elevator came to a jarring halt, the doors sliding open to reveal the dimly lit parking garage. It was mostly empty, save for a few scattered cars and the soft hum of the building's machinery. Ethan's voice came through again. I've disabled the cameras down there. You've got about 5 minutes before they figure out where you are. 5 minutes is all we need, Lucas muttered. They moved through the rows of cars, keeping low and out of sight. The weight of the drive in Lucas's pocket was a constant reminder of how much was at stake. He scanned the area, looking for an exit, but before they could move any further, the distant sound of engines roared to life. Lucas froze, instinctively pulling Sarah behind a nearby column. 3 black SUVs were pulling into the garage, their headlights cutting through the shadows. Armed men, not just security guards but professional operatives, poured out of the vehicles. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the area like predators. They've got us trapped, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Lucas's mind raced. There was no way they could outrun these men, not with the garage locked down and no easy exits in sight. But there had to be a way out. He wasn't about to let everything slip away, not now. Ethan's voice buzzed urgently in his ear. There's a delivery truck parked near the east side of the garage. I've hacked into the building's grid, and I can override the gates for a few minutes, but you have to move fast. Lucas spotted the truck Ethan mentioned, its bulky frame tucked away near a side entrance. The operatives hadn't seen it yet. That's our way out, Lucas whispered to Sarah. But we need a distraction. Before Sarah could respond, Lucas spotted a maintenance cart loaded with cleaning supplies near the center of the garage. An idea sparked in his mind, and without hesitation, he turned to her. Stay low and get ready to run. What are you? But before she could finish, Lucas darted toward the cart, grabbing a metal canister of industrial cleaner and hurling it with all his strength toward the far end of the garage. It smashed against the concrete with a deafening crash, the sound echoing through the space like a gunshot. The operatives snapped toward the noise, their weapons raised as they moved to investigate. Lucas didn't wait. Grabbing Sarah's hand, he pulled her toward the delivery truck, staying low as they crossed the open space. The adrenaline surged through him, every second stretching into what felt like minutes as they moved silently toward their escape. They reached the truck just as the operatives realized the noise was a diversion. One of them shouted, and the rest turned in their direction, sprinting toward them. But Lucas was already behind the wheel, the engine roaring to life as Sarah scrambled into the passenger seat. Go! Sarah yelled, her voice filled with panic. Lucas slammed his foot on the gas, the tires screeching as they sped toward the exit. Behind them, the operatives fired, bullets ricocheting off the metal frame of the truck, but they were too late. The gate, temporarily disabled by Ethan, slid open just enough for them to slip through. The night air hit them like a wave as they burst onto the street, leaving the chaos of Grayson Technologies behind. Lucas's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his mind still spinning from the close call, but there was no time to relax. Not yet. They had the drive, the key to exposing Grayson's empire and finally uncovering what had happened to Amelia. But the fight was far from over. "We did it," Sarah breathed, her voice trembling with disbelief. Lucas glanced at her, his jaw set. "Not yet, but we're close." The road stretched out ahead, winding through the darkness as Lucas drove in silence. The roar of the truck's engine was the only sound cutting through the night, but inside, the tension was unbearable. Sarah sat beside him, clutching the small drive, the one thing they had risked everything to retrieve. It was the key to finally exposing Grayson, to uncovering what had happened to Amelia. But now that they had it, there was a new weight pressing down on them. Lucas knew that whatever was on that drive, whatever truth it held, would change everything. They drove through the night, far away from the reach of Grayson's operatives, until finally, they arrived at Ethan's hideout. The house stood as a sanctuary of flickering screens and tangled wires, glowing faintly in the early hours of dawn. Lucas parked the truck, turning off the engine as they sat in the silence for a moment longer. "You ready for this?" Lucas asked, his voice low but steady. Sarah took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the drive. "I've been waiting my whole life for this." Together, they stepped out of the truck and entered Ethan's house, their footsteps quiet on the worn floorboards. Ethan was waiting for them, hunched over his desk, his screens flashing with activity. He didn't need to ask if they had succeeded. He could see it in their eyes. "Let's see what we've got," Ethan said, motioning for the drive. Sarah handed it to him without a word, her hand trembling slightly as Ethan inserted it into his computer. The screen lit up, lines of encrypted data flooding across it. Ethan's fingers flew over the keyboard, decrypting the files layer by layer until finally they were in. Lucas, Sarah, and Ethan watched in silence as a series of documents and videos appeared on the screen. What they saw was worse than they had imagined. Grayson's empire was built on corruption, fraud, and ruthless elimination of anyone who threatened his control. The documents detailed illegal deals, blackmail, and worse, murders made to look like accidents. And in the middle of it all was Amelia. Lucas's heart sank as a video file played. It was footage from years ago, grainy but unmistakable. Amelia was sitting in what appeared to be a dark room, speaking to the camera in a voice filled with fear and urgency. "If you're watching this," Amelia said, her eyes darting nervously, "it means I couldn't make it out. It means Grayson found me." She paused, swallowing hard. "He knows I've gathered proof of everything. I thought I could outrun him, but I was wrong." Sarah's breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth as she watched her mother's face on the screen. "I had to leave," Amelia continued, her voice breaking. "To protect Sarah. To protect you, Lucas. Grayson won't stop until he controls everything, and anyone who stands in his way." She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. For leaving without an explanation. But it was the only way to keep you both safe." Lucas felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had spent years wondering why Amelia had disappeared, why she had left him without a word. Now he knew. She hadn't left by choice. She had been running for her life, and for theirs. Amelia took a deep breath, regaining her composure. "The files are all here. Use them to bring him down. But be careful. He won't hesitate to destroy you like he did me." The video ended, the screen going dark as the room fell into a heavy silence. Lucas sat back, his mind racing. Amelia had known everything, had gathered all the evidence to expose Grayson's crimes, and had sacrificed her life to protect them. And now, it was up to them to finish what she had started. Sarah wiped her eyes, her voice shaky but determined. "We have to release this. We have to make sure the world knows the truth." Ethan nodded, already transferring the files to a secure server. "Once this goes public, There's no going back. Grayson will lose everything. Lucas stood up, his body heavy with exhaustion but fueled by a new sense of purpose. It's time to bring him down. The next few hours were a blur. Ethan worked tirelessly, uploading the files to every major news outlet, while Lucas and Sarah watched the fallout begin. The media exploded with coverage of Grayson's crimes, headline after headline exposing the truth about the man who had built an empire on lies and blood. It wasn't long before the authorities got involved. Grayson's assets were frozen, his company thrown into chaos as investigators began tearing through every corner of his business. And while he tried to disappear, it was too late. The world now knew who he really was, and there was nowhere left for him to hide. As the sun began to rise, Lucas and Sarah sat together on the front steps of Ethan's house, watching the light break over the horizon. The air was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of events that had led them here. "It's over," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and sadness. "We did it." Lucas nodded, though his heart was heavy with everything they had lost along the way. "We did." But there was something bittersweet about the victory. Grayson was finished, but Amelia was gone. Her sacrifice the price they had paid for the truth. Lucas felt the weight of her absence more than ever now, knowing that she had fought for them until the very end. After a long silence, Sarah spoke again, her voice filled with emotion. "Do you think she knew? That we'd find her? That we'd finish what she started?" Lucas turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "I think she always knew." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but this time, they weren't just tears of sadness. There was something else there, closure, finally, after years of unanswered questions. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. He looked out at the horizon, the sun climbing higher into the sky, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. Amelia was gone, but her legacy remained. She had saved them, protected them, and in the end, had given them the chance to bring down the man who had tried to destroy her. And now, it was time for them to move forward. "We'll be okay," Lucas said, his voice steady and sure. "We'll make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." Sarah smiled through her tears, nodding as she looked out at the rising sun. "Yeah, we will." And with that, they sat in the quiet dawn, the weight of the past lifting as they looked toward the future, knowing that, at last, they had done what they had set out to do. A year had passed since the day the world learned the truth about Richard Grayson. His empire had crumbled under the weight of his exposed crimes, and his name, once synonymous with power and wealth, was now a cautionary tale of greed and corruption. The legal battles were long and complicated, but in the end, justice had been served. Grayson was behind bars, stripped of everything, and Lucas and Sarah had reclaimed not only their lives but also their peace. The sun was warm as it filtered through the tall trees of the quiet lakeside property where Lucas now lived. It was a modest place compared to the towering buildings and bustling city streets he had once called home, but it was peaceful, and after everything, peace was all he wanted. Standing on the porch, Lucas watched as Sarah walked down to the water, her laughter carrying on the breeze as she splashed playfully with Ethan, who had joined them for a weekend getaway. Ethan, now working as a consultant and far removed from the dangerous world of underground hacking, had become a trusted friend and part of their small, makeshift family. Sarah had found her footing too. After the whirlwind of events that had followed Grayson's fall, she had decided to start over, away from the shadows of the past. She had taken up work in investigative journalism, using her newfound sense of purpose to expose the kinds of stories that had once haunted her own life. She was good at it, fearless and determined, and Lucas couldn't have been prouder. As Lucas watched them by the lake, a sense of contentment settled over him. The drive to always control, to always build and conquer, had given way to something simpler, something more meaningful. He had found joy in the quiet moments, in the connections he had with the people who mattered most. "Hey, Lucas," Sarah called, waving him over. "Come down here. You promised to help with the bonfire." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. I'm coming. He made his way down the grassy slope toward the water's edge, where a small pile of firewood had already been gathered. Sarah handed him a match, her face glowing with happiness. You've gotten pretty bossy, you know that? Lucas teased as he lit the kindling. Sarah laughed, shrugging playfully. I learned from the best. Ethan, sitting nearby with a grin on his face, chimed in. I'm just here for the marshmallows. As the fire crackled to life, the three of them settled into chairs around the flames, the warmth of the fire washing over them as the sun began to set. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, casting a beautiful glow over the lake. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to peek through the twilight sky. It was a far cry from the chaos of their lives a year ago, and Lucas couldn't help but feel grateful for the path they had taken to get here. So, Sarah said after a while, her voice soft, do you think she'd be proud of us? Lucas didn't need to ask who she meant. Amelia. Her presence still lingered in their lives, though the pain of her loss had faded into something more peaceful, more reflective. He smiled, nodding as he looked at the fire. Yeah, I think she would. Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. But this time it wasn't sadness. It was the joy of knowing they had honored her memory, that Amelia's sacrifice had led them to a better place. The night wore on, and they talked and laughed, sharing stories and dreams for the future. As the fire died down to glowing embers, Lucas found himself staring at the stars, feeling a sense of closure and contentment he hadn't felt in years. There were no more secrets, no more shadows hanging over their heads. They had faced the past, unraveled the mysteries that had haunted them, and now they were free. For the first time in a long time, Lucas felt truly happy. He had lost much, but he had gained something even greater: a family, a purpose, and a future filled with hope. And as he sat there by the fire, surrounded by the people he cared about most, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The past was behind them. The future was theirs to shape, and they were ready.